The city had only just begun to stir, its concrete arteries pulsing to life beneath a golden wash of sunlight that spilled between the high-rises. The air was rich with the scent of roasting beans from corner cafes and the metallic whine of delivery trucks making their early rounds. Downtown bustled with the usual choreography, business suits brushing past street vendors, joggers weaving between dog walkers, laughter trickling out of breakfast spots like steam from a killed Jamal Carter emerged from a small diner tucked between a florist and an old record shop. The door jingled behind him, and the waitress inside waved fondly, "See you next week, Mr. Carter." He nodded with a small, easy smile. "Wouldn't miss it, Linda. Tell Chef that turkey bacon was cooked to perfection this time." His stride was measured but relaxed, the soles of his polished Oxfords ticking softly against the pavement. He moved through the street like someone who didn't just belong, but elevated the space around him, a man rooted in discipline, draped in a tailored navy suit that caught the morning light just so. Crisp white cuffs peeked from his sleeves, and a classic leather watch hugged his wrist. Every detail spoke of quiet elegance, intentional choices, yet there was nothing boastful in his presence. If anything, it was the restraint that turned heads. He paused briefly outside the florist's shop. Inside, a small woman waved from behind a wall of orchids. Jamal held up a finger, then stepped in quickly and returned with a single sunflower, fresh and vivid. 3 doors down, Mrs. Agnes Carter, not related, but fond of pretending otherwise, was arranging her recycling bins at the base of her stoop. Her white cardigan hung off one shoulder, and a floral headwrap covered her silver curls. "Morning, Miss Agnes," Jamal called as he approached. "Brought you something to match your spirit." She gasped theatrically. "Oh, Lord. Now how's a woman supposed to stay humble with you walking these streets?" He handed her the flower and leaned in for a cheek kiss. "It's a losing battle, ma'am." As he walked away, his phone buzzed. "Don't forget dinner at 7. Your sister's bringing that sweet potato pie I know you love. XO, Mom." A rare grin tugged at the corner of Jamal's mouth. He typed back quickly, "I'll be there. And I'll bring the wine." He was just reaching for his car door when he noticed a shift in energy. 2 uniformed officers were making their way toward him, cutting across the sidewalk with a deliberate stride, their eyes locked on him long before they were close enough to speak. One stocky, ruddy face wore his badge like a dare. The other walked with a hand lazily grazing the top of his utility belt. Jamal stiffened inwardly, but showed none of it on his face. He offered a nod as they approached. "Morning, officers," he said with a calm he'd cultivated over decades. "Can I help you?" The shorter one, his badge read. Riley squinted. "Mind showing us some ID?" Jamal blinked. "May I ask why?" Riley's lips curled. "You fit a description, just a routine stop." The other officer, Jenkins, was now flanking Jamal's left, uncomfortably close. Jamal slowly reached into his inside jacket pocket, pulling out his wallet and offering his license. "I've just come from breakfast, and I'm headed to my office." "Is something going on?" "You tell us," Riley muttered, scanning the card. "What's a man like you doing in a neighborhood like this?" Jamal's breath caught. He'd heard versions of that question too many times. Still, he kept his voice level. "I live for blocks east. I frequent that diner every week. Not sure what neighborhood you think this is." Jenkins stepped closer. "Got anything illegal in that car?" "No. And unless you have probable cause, step back from the vehicle," Riley interrupted, his tone hardening. "Now," Jamal hesitated. For a moment, the world seemed to still. The chatter of pedestrians, the distant horn, the trill of a sparrow somewhere overhead. He thought of his father's voice. "Don't make them nervous, son. Don't give them a reason." He stepped back, but they had already decided. Riley grabbed his arm without warning, twisting it behind his back with unnecessary force. Jamal winced, his balance knocked as Jenkins swept in from behind, locking the other wrist in the cuffs with a sharp metallic click. "Hey, he didn't do anything." Someone shouted from across the street. A phone camera caught the scene. "This is messed up. Resisting arrest," Jenkins said, almost lazily. Jamal couldn't believe it. "I didn't resist. I complied." Riley pushed him toward the cruiser. "Tell it to the judge." As the squad car door slammed shut, Jamal's eyes met those of the growing crowd. He saw outrage, confusion, and cameras. At least, he thought, the truth would not be buried. "This isn't over." He said through the window, not in anger, but with the clarity of a man who had already begun to turn injustice into purpose. They had no idea who they had just put in cuffs, But they were about to find out. The squad car cut through the city like a blade. The sirens silent, but the injustice screaming louder than any wail. Inside, Jamal Carter sat cuffed, the cold steel biting into his wrists. His head rested lightly against the window, eyes scanning the familiar streets now blurred with irony. Each corner held a memory cases he'd fought, lives he protected, rights he defended. Now, those same streets watched in stunned silence as he was hauled off like a criminal. He took slow, deep breaths, counting them like prayers. He needed to stay clear, composed. Rage would be a betrayal of every client he had ever told. We fight smart, not loud. At the precinct, fluorescent lights buzzed like flies above rotten fruit. The lobby was busy. Dispatch radios crackled, boots stomped across tile. Officers exchanged coffee orders and gallows humor. But when Riley and Jenkins marched in with Jamal between them, a shift rippled through the space. Jamal's tailored suit stood in sharp contrast to the usual holding cell clientele. Some officers glanced up from their desks, brows furrowing at the sight. Others turned away too quickly. Name, barked the desk sergeant, barely glancing up. Carter. Jamal Carter. A pause. The officer typed, waited for the database to pull his file, but nothing popped up. No priors. Jamal said nothing. He didn't need to. The silence already spoke volumes. Fingerprints, photographs, belongings in a tray. Jamal's Rolex, his wedding band, his phone all stripped like dignity in front of indifferent eyes. Riley leaned against the wall, watching him. Fancy watch, he muttered, almost to himself. Bet your lawyer friends are gonna love that mugshot. Jenkins smirked, but said nothing. For all his bluster, there was a hint of unease in his eyes now. Something about how calm Jamal was, how he hadn't shouted, hadn't panicked. It didn't fit the script, and that unsettled him more than he'd admit. In the back hallway, Lieutenant Kate Thompson stood by the vending machine, watching the scene through the one-way glass of the booking room. Her arms were folded across her chest, jaw tight. She'd transferred to this department 6 weeks ago. She had heard whispers about officers Riley and Jenkins, their history of creative enforcement, the complaints buried under piles of paperwork. But complaints were shadows in precincts like this, easy to ignore, until something stepped into the light, and Jamal Carter radiated light in the most unnerving way. She didn't know who he was yet, but she knew what he wasn't. A common street hustler. His posture was too exact, his eyes too sharp. He hadn't once looked afraid, just observant. She walked into the observation room and found Officer Stevens, a rookie with a sharp mind and a quieter mouth than most. You saw who they brought in. Stevens nodded. Yeah, something feels off. You see how calm he is. You recognize him? She asked. Stevens hesitated, then pulled out his phone. I think I've seen him somewhere, news or something. Civil rights case, maybe. He looked like that attorney. The one from the Stonebridge case. Thompson's brow arched. The case where the department got dissolved. Yeah, that one. Her stomach tightened. Find out for sure. Quietly, as Stevens stepped away, Thompson turned back toward the window. Riley and Jenkins were finishing their paperwork. Riley leaned in toward the desk sergeant, chuckling. Guy thought he was smarter than us. Asked for probable cause, like he's in court or something. Thompson stepped into the room before she'd even decided to. Officers, she said, her voice cool as steel under snow, walk me through the rest. Riley's smirk faltered. He matched a description. Ma'am, suspicious behavior, possible trespass. When we approached, he got defensive. Did he resist? She asked, eyes unreadable. Well, Jenkins glanced at Riley, then back at her. He hesitated. Thompson repeated, her tone neutral, but loaded. That's what we're calling resisting arrest now. Neither answered. She stared at them both for a long second. Put him in holding. I want to speak with him myself. Down the corridor, behind a locked metal door, Jamal sat on a hard bench in holding cell 4. The walls were grimy, pocked with shoe marks and the dried remnants of spit and frustration. But Jamal sat straight-backed, hands folded, a lawyer even without a suit jacket. He wasn't planning his escape. He was cataloging everything, every procedural failure, every broken policy, every word that had been spoken to him, all of it. Ammunition. He wasn't alone. The memory of Devin Brooks, 17 years old, who spent 6 months in jail for a crime he didn't commit until Jamal got him out. The faces of his former clients surrounded him, ghost-like, whispering strength into his bones. The door opened. Not Riley, not Jenkins. A woman in uniform, dark blazer, gold bar, sharp gaze. "Mr. Carter?" she asked. Jamal met her eyes. Calm, cool, unafraid. "Yes, I'm Lieutenant Thompson. I'd like to speak with you." He stood slowly, the light catching on his cuffed wrists. "That makes two of us." She didn't yet know who he was. But in that instant, something deep in her gut told her this arrest was going to change everything. And it was already too late to undo what had been set in motion. Not just a legal case, a reckoning. The door to the interview room shut with a soft metallic clunk, but the weight of it was deafening. The room was chilled, sterile, nothing but a metal table, 2 chairs, and a mounted camera in the corner with a blinking red light that might as well have been a silent witness to every injustice that had passed through these walls. Jamal Carter sat with a composed stillness. His hands remained cuffed, but he didn't seem diminished by them. Instead, they rested neatly on the table as if he were the one conducting the interview. Lieutenant Kate Thompson sat across from him, her spine straight, fingers laced on a notepad she hadn't written on yet. Her eyes studied him not as a suspect, not as a threat, but as a question. "Mr. Carter," she began, her voice even, "I'd like to ask you a few questions. I've reviewed the report from Officers Riley and Jenkins. I'm sure it was a thrilling work of fiction." Jamal said calmly, his gaze unwavering. "They've always wanted to be authors." She blinked, but a corner of her mouth twitched just slightly. "You say they arrested you without cause." "I didn't say that. I lived it." He leaned forward, slow and deliberate. "I was coming back from breakfast. My ID was handed over without incident. I asked why I was being stopped. That was enough, apparently, for one to grab my arm and the other to slam me into the pavement. Then came the cuffs and the charge, resisting arrest. Without resisting." Thompson exhaled through her nose, trying to ignore the unease blooming in her gut. "Do you know why you might have matched the description they were acting on?" "Because I'm a black man in a suit on a Tuesday morning," Jamal said. "Take your pick." She hesitated. "What do you do for a living, Mr. Carter?" Jamal looked at her carefully, studying her expression, weighing the moment. "I practice law," he said finally. "Civil rights. I specialize in police misconduct. I represent families who've lost sons to departments just like this one." Pause. No smile, no edge in his voice, just truth raw and chilling in its simplicity. Across the station, Officer Stevens was hunched over his desk, scrolling through his phone. His fingers moved quickly, searching the name he couldn't shake. From his head, Jamal Carter. The search bar populated almost before he finished typing. The headlines hit like a hammer. Attorney Jamal Carter wins $12 million settlement against state police. Civil rights powerhouse Carter exposes cover-up in Stonebridge. Jamal Carter named special advisor to Federal Police Oversight Board. Stevens' breath caught. His mind began to spin. They hadn't arrested some lawyer. They had arrested the lawyer one whose name struck fear in the hearts of departments coast to coast. He stood so fast his chair screeched. "Lieutenant," he called out, bolting from the bullpen. Back in the interview room, Thompson was still trying to maintain her composure, but the balance was shifting. "If that's true," she said slowly, "why didn't you say who you were from the beginning?" Jamal smiled faintly. "Because it shouldn't matter. Because this right here," he gestured to the cuffs, to the walls, to the silent camera, "is why I do what I do." Before Thompson could respond, the door opened with a sharp knock. "Ma'am," Stevens said, breathless, "I need to speak to you." She stood, excusing herself with a quick glance at Jamal. He leaned back in his chair and watched the door close again. The tiniest crack of something sharp in his eyes, part calculation, part fury, part hope. In the hallway, Stevens handed her his phone. "He's not just a lawyer, Lieutenant. He's the Jamal Carter. He's on every major case in the last 5 years. He's been working with the feds on internal investigations. If this gets out," Thompson's stomach sank. "Oh God," she whispered. Riley and Jenkins walked right into a hornet's nest. Stevens nodded, and it's buzzing. As if summoned by prophecy, the first signs of pressure began to build outside. Protesters had already begun to gather at the station steps. Word spreading fast via Twitter and Instagram. The footage from earlier, the wrongful arrest, the cuffs, the unmistakable voice of Jamal Carter saying, "Asterisk, this isn't over," asterisk, had gone viral. Hashtag Justice for Jamal was now trending. Inside the precinct, the temperature shifted. Officers started whispering. Phones rang faster. Reporters began circling like sharks. Thompson marched into the chief's office. "Chief Daniels," she said without waiting to be invited in. "We have a problem." Daniels looked up from his desk, his eyes already tired. "If it's about that protest outside, I've seen it. I've got comms working on a statement. It's not just a protest," Thompson said, voice tight. "The man we brought in, he's Jamal Carter. He's a federal consultant on civil rights law. He's been embedded in investigations into departments, just like ours." Daniels went still. "That can't be." "It is," she said. "We just made him the face of every police brutality case in America." The chief's face darkened. Outside, the crowd was now chanting, "Let him go. No justice, no peace. We see you, Jamal." Back in the interview room, Jamal sat quietly, but his mind raced with perfect precision. This wasn't a disaster for him. It was a beginning. The air outside the precinct had changed. It was no longer just weather. It was charged with something ancient, something simmering just beneath the surface. The kind of tension that bent streets and fractured silence. By noon, the sky had turned the color of tarnished brass, the kind that never bodes well in a city already humming with unrest. Outside the station, a crowd had gathered. Dozens had become hundreds, and now the sidewalks were choked with voices. Signs waved above, heads like battle standards. "Justice for Jamal. Protect and serve, not profile and persecute. We see you." They chanted his name like a drumbeat. Jamal Carter. Say his name. It wasn't just the usual protest organizers. It was mothers with strollers, barbers who had closed early, college kids broadcasting live, ministers with megaphones. Local news vans formed a crooked line along the curb, camera crews setting up like they were preparing for a coronation or a war. Inside the precinct, the mood had curdled. Phones rang endlessly. Officers whispered in corners, some trying to duck responsibility, others now questioning everything. The break room TV played muted clips of Jamal's arrest on a loop. The city had turned its eyes inward, and what it saw was ugly dot in the command office. Chief Frank Daniels stood rigid, one hand braced on the windowsill, the other clenching the blinds shut between two fingers. The crowd outside surged like an ocean tide. He couldn't stop. Lieutenant Thompson stood beside him, a tablet in hand. Media swarming. Legal Affairs is fielding calls from the mayor's office, and the governor's chief of staff called twice. This isn't going away. Daniels didn't turn around. "I know who he is now. You didn't earlier," Thompson said pointedly. "And now the entire country does." Daniels exhaled, jaw locked. "What do we do?" Thompson stepped forward, her voice harder than steel. "You do the only thing you can. You release him, publicly, today, before this becomes another name we remember in a courtroom and a mural." Daniels shook his head. "You really think an apology will fix this?" "No," Thompson said, "but a cover-up will bury us." At that moment, Officer Stevens appeared at the door, his face pale, lips tight. "Lieutenant, you need to see this." He handed her his phone. Thompson watched the screen in silence. It was a new video, one that hadn't aired yet. Footage from a bystander's angle, showing the full encounter, Jamal calmly offering his ID, asking a question, and being violently cuffed without warning. The screams, the pleas, the phone cameras, all recorded, all damning. "Send that to the chief," she said, "and start preparing a release statement. We're not sweeping this under the rug." Meanwhile, in holding cell 4, Jamal sat still as a mountain, listening to the muffled chants spilling through the concrete walls. He couldn't see the crowd, but he felt them. Every voice out there carried the weight of stories just like his, silenced, ignored, rewritten to fit a narrative that never served them. He had spent his entire career fighting for people who never got this moment. Now he stood in the center of it. The cell door opened. Lieutenant Thompson stepped inside. "You're being released, Mr. Carter." Jamal stood slowly. "I didn't realize justice moved so swiftly. It usually doesn't," she said. "Today, it has helped." She led him down the hallway. As they walked past desks and officers pretending to work, all eyes followed. No one spoke. No one dared dot Jenkins, and Riley stood near the back, pale and silent. Riley's jaw flexed, but the usual arrogance was gone. Jenkins looked like he wanted to melt into the wall. Jamal stopped. He turned slowly, eyes locking with both of them, and in that gaze was no rage, no threat, just an unbearable mirror. And what it reflected wasn't just guilt, it was legacy. No words were exchanged. Thompson pushed the final door open. Outside, the roar was instant. The crowd erupted as Jamal Carter stepped into daylight, his suit still immaculate, his head high. Flashbulbs exploded, reporters surged forward, microphones extended like spears. But Jamal didn't flinch. He raised a hand. The noise softened. He stepped forward, voice even, eyes locked with the people who had waited for him. "I thank you," he began, "for standing here. Not just for me, but for the truth. Today I walk free, but too many before me didn't." The crowd held its breath. This wasn't just about one stop, one badge, one bad call. This was about the system and the silence that keeps it in place. His words cut through the air like gospel. "You all saw the truth. You recorded it. You shouted. You stood up. And because of that, change will come." He stepped down from the steps. No PR team. No handlers. Just him and the people. As the chants picked up again, someone passed him a megaphone. He took it, not as a symbol of protest, but of purpose. "This is not the end," he said. "This is the beginning of a reckoning." Behind him, inside the station, Thompson watched with a mix of awe and dread. She knew what came next wouldn't be easy. Not for her, not for the department, not for the city. But for the first time in years, she felt something she hadn't expected. Hope. It had been 48 hours since Jamal Carter walked out of the precinct, and the city hadn't taken a single breath since. The video had gone viral across every platform. National news anchors debated it on split screens while scrolling headlines, screamed words like racial profiling, unlawful arrest, and civil rights time bomb. Activist groups called emergency press conferences. Civil liberties attorneys pounced like wolves. And beneath it all, the people, thousands of them, kept the pressure alive, marching through the streets, lighting candles at courthouses, and chanting Jamal's name like a battle hymn. Inside the walls of the precinct, a different war was being waged, quieter, but no less dangerous. Lieutenant Kate Thompson stood in the chief's office, her arms crossed tightly, watching a team of internal affairs officers sweep the squad room floor. Boxes of old arrest records were being stacked against the wall. Every document with Riley or Jenkins' signature was now under a microscope. "You did this," Chief Daniels muttered under his breath, not looking at her. Thompson didn't flinch. "No, Frank, they did this. I just stopped you from burying it." His jaw clenched. "Do you know how long I've kept this department from collapsing? How many fires I've put out just to keep morale steady?" She turned to face him. "Maybe it's time it burns down, so we can rebuild something better." Daniels didn't respond, but the silence between them wasn't just tension anymore. It was fear. Outside City Hall, Jamal stood in a small circle of trusted allies. Around him were educators, public defenders, organizers, and legal minds, people who had marched beside him, fought alongside him in courtrooms, and watched too many body cams cut out the early. He held a folder in one hand. Inside was a blueprint, the Community Justice Initiative. "This isn't just about lawsuits," Jamal said, looking each of them in the eye. "We've spent years reacting. I'm tired of reaction. I want prevention. I want infrastructure. I want power, not just in the streets, but in the system." "What are you thinking?" asked Maria Hernandez, a fiery educator and longtime school reform advocate. "A multi-pronged assault," Jamal replied. "Legal aid for low-income defendants, independent review boards with teeth, education programs in public schools. Not just about rights, but about power. We teach these kids how to fight with facts, cameras, and law." "What about the department?" someone asked. "They're already starting to circle the wagons." Jamal smiled grimly. "Then we hit them. First, back at the precinct, Jenkins sat at his desk, sweating through his collar. He hadn't slept since their arrest. His phone had been flooded with death threats, lawsuits, and press calls. His wife had taken the kids to her sister's house. He stared at a memo marked "Firearms and Use of Force Review. Immediate action required." "I can't breathe," he whispered. Across the bullpen, Riley was unraveling faster. His desk was empty, his badge gone. Word had it he was lawyering up, trying to claim mental duress. "They're making me a scapegoat," he hissed to a fellow officer in the hallway. "You think I'm going down alone?" Lieutenant Thompson knew the fire was spreading. It was just the beginning. The DOJ had quietly opened a file on the department. There were whispers, federal monitors, budget audits, indictments, But it wasn't just government forces watching. There were other eyes now. From the back of a black SUV parked the blocks from the precinct, a man in a dark tailored suit observed the building. He sipped from a steel travel mug and made a note on a leather-bound tablet. His face was unreadable, but his presence was undeniable. Government, private sector, hard to say. He picked up a burner phone and made a single call. "It's begun," he said simply. "Carter's not just a lawyer. He's the fault line." Then he hung up. Back at City Hall, Jamal stood at a podium. News crews were already in place. The room was full. City officials, lawyers, and most importantly, citizens. "We are not waiting for the system to fix itself," Jamal began, his voice sharp as flint. "We are building our own safeguards. We are building new roads to justice. And we are naming names, filing suits, and demanding change now." The room erupted. Applause. Shouting. Rising voices like thunder in a canyon. But Jamal raised his hand. "There's one more thing," he said, his tone now a weapon. He pulled a USB stick from his pocket. "This contains over 1,100 arrest reports, body cam clips, and internal emails I legally obtained as part of a federal investigation. Some of them concern this very precinct." Gasps. Shocked. Journalists surged forward. "I promised you this wasn't over," he said, "and I keep my promises." As he stepped down from the podium, the press exploded behind him. But Jamal kept walking, not because he didn't care, but because he wasn't done yet. In the city, this broken, brilliant, burning city was about to learn what happens when the law is wielded by someone who remembers exactly what injustice tastes like. Rain tapped steadily on the courthouse dome like an impatient heartbeat. By morning, the skies had turned slate gray, not a mourning, but a warning. Inside the courtroom, the air was thick, not with silence, but with anticipation, a kind of dense, electric stillness. Like everyone inside knew something historic was about to happen, but didn't quite believe it yet. Jamal Carter stood at the front table, wearing a navy three-piece suit sharp enough to cut through steel. No tie, no need. He didn't have to prove he belonged here. He was this room now. To his left were attorneys from the Department of Justice. To his right sat city officials, a few looking pale, a few stone-faced, and behind him, media, protest leaders, local citizens, and the families of those who had suffered for years under the weight of a corrupted badge. The judge, a respected federal magistrate flown in from out of state, adjusted her glasses. "Mr. Carter," she said, her voice even. "You may proceed." Jamal stepped forward. His voice was calm, low, but carried like thunder across stone. "Your Honor, what I bring today is not simply evidence. It is not just policy violations or paperwork failures or misfiled reports. What I bring is a map, a trail of misconduct, so systemic, so deliberate, it reveals not a few bad apples, but a poisoned orchard." He reached into his briefcase and laid out a series of documents, each bearing city seals and internal headers, memos, emails, body cam freeze frames, suppressed footage, mismatched timestamps, doctored witness statements, over 60 falsified arrest reports. He said, more than 200 excessive force incidents swept under internal review. 5 officers with sealed misconduct records reassigned. Instead of investigated, this department didn't fail to see the rot. They covered it. They cultivated it. The courtroom rustled. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras clicked like distant thunder. Jamal took a breath, and then he went in for the kill. He reached into the folder again, and finally, Exhibit 47, he said, holding up a flash drive. "This contains a recorded phone call between former Officer Riley and a supervisor," gasps, "in which Riley admits to targeting Mr. Devin Knight because he fit the quota. That call was time-stamped to days before Devin was wrongfully arrested and assaulted. The department told his family there was no footage. They lied. That footage is on this drive. It ends with Devin, bloodied, asking, 'What did I do?'" The courtroom went silent, dead silent. Somewhere in the back, a woman wept. The judge slowly nodded. The court will recess briefly to review this evidence, but no one stood, not yet. All eyes remained on Jamal, because they knew the evidence was the spark, but he was the flame. Outside the courthouse, thousands had gathered. Screens, mounted on scaffolding, replayed his speech in real time. Activists handed out flyers for town halls. Students chanted. Street artists spray-painted Jamal's image next to Martin and Malcolm. And inside the walls of the city's police department, everything had begun to crack. Lieutenant Kate Thompson sat at her desk, watching the live stream. Round her, boxes were packed. Not hers, theirs. Internal affairs had moved in like a storm front. 5 officers were under criminal investigation. 2 more had resigned overnight. And Chief Daniels? He had disappeared, called in sick. Though everyone knew it was just the first step before the fall, a knock came at her office door. It was Agent Mark Williams, the federal investigator overseeing the reform plan. He offered a small nod. It's done. The oversight order is signed. You're now interim chief, and the DOJ will be assigning permanent monitors. Thompson swallowed the lump in her throat. What about Carter? He just changed the trajectory of an entire city, across town, in a packed community center. Jamal stood before a podium, not in a courtroom now, but among the people. His people, the ones who had carried this movement with sweat, tears, and stories. He looked out over the sea of faces, mothers holding children, ex-cons holding clipboards, teachers, barbers, librarians, people who had waited their whole lives for this moment. Not a victory lap, but the starting line of something real. He raised the mic and spoke. What happened to me happens every day. That's why I didn't scream. I planned. That's why I didn't fight. I documented. That's why I didn't flinch. I remember the faces of the ones who came before me and the ones who couldn't walk free. He looked to the young man in the front row, clutching a flyer that read future lawyer. I didn't start this movement. You did, with your phones, your protests, your refusal to shut up. I was just the match. You're the fire. Applause shook the walls. Tonight, we celebrate. But tomorrow, we build. We train. We teach. We take seats at the tables they tried to keep us out of. The law has been used against us for too long. Now we wield it. And then, he said the words no one expected, and yet everyone had hoped for. I'm running for district attorney. The room exploded. The city, broken, brutal, and beautiful, erupted with a sound that was not rage, but rebirth. Justice wasn't a statue anymore. It had a name, and it walked, spoke, and fought like a man in a Navy suit named Jamal Carter.